Well, once again, I want to thank my guests that come aboard our media ministry outreach in terms of interviews and sharing. And I want to thank Justin Stapleton and Shauna Jones. Thank you for coming aboard to our virtual studio here in Internet Land. And thanks so much for coming aboard again at such a very early hour. As I've shared with you, I hope you guys are enjoying your coffee. I don't drink the stuff. You could have mine. So I'm glad you came today. Thank you for coming. And
Thank you for having us.
All right, great. So, well, this is our second podcast entitled Through the Xenosverse, where we will be speaking of all things Xenos. Nothing is untouchable. We can go there if we want to. I mean, this is America, this is why we are here. We are here to get into substantial discussion about this movement, which has become so very much a focus of our discussion here on our podcasts and through our ministry, and it was something that a year ago I had not even begun to think about, and now it consumes so much of my time, and I think for a very good reason. Is because there needs to be a lot said about Xenos. So we really appreciate, once again, Justin and Shauna, you coming on. Shauna, you are our very first podcast person who we interviewed, and Justin, you were one of our later ones. You guys have both been on the podcast, and this is kind of a little more livelier version of it. This is and I appreciate your thoughts on perhaps some of the things that we've been discussing. What comes to your mind lately when you think about Xenos? Now, beyond the obvious, we understand Xenos to be an abusive movement that just refuses to see itself as being the cultically driven place that it is. That's to me the obvious. That's where we stand. That's been our position. I've come to learn that, and sadly, you guys have faced the implication. You've lived out the impact of it in your own lives, and I'm grateful that you shared. But beyond that, though, what comes to your mind lately? They've been under an awful lot of contradictory and very challenging media exposure and a lot of internal conflict that's going on. What comes to your mind about Xenos these days when you think about it?
In a word, scared. They're scared. They have never had a contingency and plan for this. They thought, hey, we're going to grow. We're so great. We're perfect. Nobody's ever going to leave. Nobody's ever going to have any discourse because we're doing everything the way Jesus told us to do it. We are ordained by God to do everything this way, no other way. We have authority. We are not accountable.
Right.
And now they're getting consequences for their actions, and people are speaking up and more every day. You can watch by their own senses how their membership keeps declining, and they weren't prepared for this. And so I would say they're scared. That's why they have the convenience of saying, hey, we're just being attacked by Satan. This is all demonic attack. When it's not, it's people saying, hey, you need to be accountable. You've been hurting people for decades, for half a century. It's time for you to start being accountable.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree.
So the constant theme, I think, for me has been hypocrisy at its best, right?
Yeah.
The lack of accountability. I mean, it's really just so easy to say, man, we didn't realize, the depths and breadths of what was going on here. While we didn't have specifics or specific instances, that we can cite. And yes, there's two sides to every story. Every story. With there being so many stories, there has to be some level of truth to this,
Right.
right?
Right.
So while we maybe can't specifically pinpoint things or publicly discuss specific instances, like, we're really going to take this before the Lord and, ask the Lord to seek our hearts, and root out what is going on. That's so easy. My God. I mean, legitimately, I don't know what your experience was, Justin, but mine, I know that I could have gotten away with a lot of things if I just spewed back the rhetoric that they wanted me to say.
Right. Get
And
with the program.
yeah,
Once
fake
you
it
get
till
with
you
the
make
program, you're okay. You master the body of knowledge.
exactly.
Right.
Fake it till you make it. And secondary to that is the lack of accountability, right? The fact that they just can't acknowledge that there may be an issue. They don't even have to say there is an absolute issue. Like, there may be a problem, so let's take a look at things. Like, the thing is, back to the hypocrisy point that I was making. I was specifically told by leadership on different occasions when I was struggling with something that you are struggling with this because of this, and you need to fix that particular thing. So you need to get right with God about that particular thing. That can we not say that back?
Mm-hmm.
Can
Right.
can you not follow your own thing?
Right.
Your own pattern of church discipline.
Right.
It, how is it that simply because a few, I don't know, 100,000 or so people are saying very similar things, at least
Mm-hmm.
a similar vein, that you can't see that there is something going on? And why is it, how have you determined that it's attacked by Satan? Are we all demon possessed?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't understand, because I can say that I heard from God. How do you
Mm-hmm.
know that? How do you know that God told you this, that, and the other?
Mm-hmm.
Questionable.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I had a thought and it just left.
Bring it back.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. Unfortunately, age waits for no one. Um,
I heard that. No.
Speaking to
So.
the
okay. Yeah, my thought was on accountability. The higher up you go in leadership, the fewer people you're accountable to, and that's completely opposite of the way anything is, church or government. The more people you have authority over, those are the people you are accountable to.
Right.
And I can't say, as many churches I've been in my life, it's very few times I've ever seen a pastor take a pulpit and say, okay, I need to start confessing my sins to you guys before we even get started. I've been struggling with this, and I will you guys forgive me? And I've never seen anything like that in Xenos. Only time
Right.
I've ever seen anybody do that was like maybe a house leader at a cell group meeting. Men's cell group meeting, confess, hey, I was struggling with this week, but I've
Right.
never seen anybody higher up.
Right. Right.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the absolute truth. Like our president works for, all of us. Our state representatives work for us. They're accountable to us. Isn't that how church leadership should be?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
I
that's
I
go ahead,
understand
John.
the parallel that you're making, Justin, but at the same time, if you look at the climate of our society, that is exactly how Xenos is working, how Dwell is working.
Mm-hmm.
It is exactly. Our elected leaders are supposed to be working for us, but are they?
Oh
Because
no,
there's
no, but but that's the way it's supposed to work.
right. In theory,
In a
it's
perfect world,
like that.
Yeah.
in a New
But
Testament church.
here's the thing though. I mean, yes, it doesn't really help so much in present day or even in the past, right? But scripture says that pastoral leadership will be held by God at a higher level, right? So on
Yeah,
Judgment
right.
Day, I mean, are we going to feel vindicated on Judgment Day? Because
Mhm.
just because, we have left the church doesn't mean that we've left God, right?
Absolutely,
Mhm.
And
absolutely.
um
Right.
we discuss these things because of how the church leadership has dealt with or failed to deal with the abuse allegations, right? And there's varying degrees of abuse. We're not saying that it's like the instances in the Catholic Church where it's the minister or the pastors, what priests, whatever. Jeez, I grew up Catholic. You'd think I could know the hierarchy here.
So that
That there is absolute vile, disgusting things
yeah,
going on. But just like a sin is a sin is a sin, no one is greater than the other. It's the same thing. Nothing. Their abuse level does not. While it may not be criminal, it's still a violation against another human. You have still sinned against another human.
right. See, I remember when I grew up, and I grew up Roman Catholic, and I remember. Now, remember, there's a distinction, however, in Roman Catholicism. There's mortal, and then there's venial sin.
Right.
Venial sins are those little things you can do, like lying and the little white lie, and the perhaps looking after the man or the woman to lust after, or getting a little too tipsy or a little too ornery, and being impatient, a little bit of road rage. The mortal sins, however, are those big ones that would actually absolutely floor you and put you in mortal peril of eternal damnation. And that was for example, not going to mass, not going to confessional, murdering somebody, marrying outside the Roman Catholic faith. I mean, those were distinctions that they set up.
Well, that's
And
kind of a sin with Xenos marrying outside of Xenos.
yeah, yeah,
Well, don't be unequally yoked. That's thrown all around all the time.
right, right. So there is a distinction in sin. So, and when you start, but see, that's as you said, well, Shauna, I mean, sin is sin. I mean, wrong is wrong. The consequences might vary, impact might vary, but it's still wrong. It's still an offense to God. It's what Christ died for. He died on the cross to save the world from its sin. He became an offering for sin. So I think if Jesus is who he says he is, God the Son, the Messiah, if he came to this earth to die for that specific reason, that was his entire redemptive purpose to be here. It wasn't just to be some great teacher. He came to die at the cross. It means to me when you hear about that, you read at least that whether you believe it or not, at least you get the point is that if Jesus came and died for that reason, then sin matters.
Right.
Sin definitely matters, no matter what degree it is. It matters that much to God that his son freely came and he died for it, and to redeem us, to pull our own fat out of the fire for it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that does matter. And in Xenos and in any cultic movement, like any cultic movement, sins are things that the little people do. The leadership doesn't do that. The leadership does not do that. Right?
Question with being a cult authority, so to say. Would you say that there are varying degrees of cults? Like how, is there a spectrum, would you say? Like Jim Jones and that was blatantly a cult, right?
Mhm.
Scientology, I would say, is blatantly a cult.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even the Gwen Shamblin and that, I may be saying her name wrong, whatever, the way down.
No, you got it right.
Great.
You got it right. The Reverend Fellowship, Way Down Workshop. Yeah. Her.
Yeah. That there, would you say that there are varying degrees, or, like, oh, they are 48% occult, or
When you say varying degrees, I think you're referring to. I think you're saying, are certain things more cultic than other? Are certain groups more cultic, more
yeah,
controlling than others?
yeah,
I would say, yeah. Cultism is an equal opportunity human condition.
sure.
Regardless whether we want to admit it or not, everyone is prone to the fallacies and the conditions that can lead you into behavior that we can call cultic.
Mhm.
Cultic being a group, referring to a condition where people are following one group or the one group's leadership in a agenda that's clearly counter it's antisocial, spiritually and emotionally abusive, etc., etc. And it's all rotating around their common worldview, which is very exclusive, very elitist. Now, elitism, the tendency to blindly follow, that's part of human nature.
Hmm.
I mean, that's been one of my key teachings all my life about this, and I think there are certain cults that are certainly much more immersive, much more totalist than
Mhm.
others, and there are cultic conditions within human nature that are latent within us all, that can certainly lead us to become cultists or cult followers. I
Hmm.
mean, if I'm not careful, I can become a cult leader. What I do can be perverted into something, because that's just how we are. We're all weak human people, and that's why the whole point you guys have been making about accountability, about people being submitting one to another, is so vital. When that's lost, when someone gets on top and begins to rule from on high and speak with a divine voice and has the only exclusive viewpoint by which everyone's supposed to live around, that's when you have a cultic movement. And there are some movements which are where those things are much more pronounced, much more well hidden, like Jim Jones, like Remnant Fellowship, as opposed to something like Xenos. Xenos is much more nuanced, as insofar as they're able to push everybody who troubles them, who they really want to be cultic to, behind a closed door. I mean, obviously, it's much more difficult to see how abusive Xenos is, because they do so much of what they do behind small groups, in
Right.
house churches, in home fellowships, in those intimate one-on-one fellowships that or interactions that disciples have with disciples. Yeah, to me, yeah, it's definitely there are definitely groups that are more cultic and more abusive than others, but the abuse is still there. I mean, regardless whether I might consider uh, this church down the street with 10 to 12 people, and it's the same little old ladies keep going in and throwing their money down, and emptying their pocketbook and on the stairs for the preacher to gather up. Uh, because of the fact that they've been told that if they don't seed their money into this ministry, that their son or their daughter might not get saved, that they might not be healed, that prayer they pray might not be answered. Is that abusive? Bottom dollar, it is. Yeah, because that's not God. That's not how God and grace work. But just this little tiny little church out in the middle of nowhere, no one will ever hear about it, but God will. God does.
Hmm.
As opposed to the massive media giants like Scientology that routinely have made that their modus operandi. So yeah, there are definitely groups that are much more cultic than others, but it's still damaging, still
Sure.
hurting, and so I'm sorry to take a circuitous route to answer your question,
No,
but yeah,
no,
definitely.
fine.
I mean, to add on, I would say that that there are plenty of things that are cultic that aren't even necessarily negative. 12-step programs and support groups. I mean, even our Xenos support group is on Reddit been accused of being a cult. I don't see it, but I can see where it could be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And it's again, that's the major thing for me in using the word the cult. The word cult is such a loaded gun, and people
Right.
like to use it in terrifying ways. But when you pull it for all its fangs and all its stingers, it's just a very, very quick way to try to explain how people act within a certain circle, and those actions are usually quite predictable.
Mhm.
That's why when I came and started listening to what you shared, Shauna and Justin, what you've shared, what others have shared, and what I've read. Mark Kennedy's website was incredibly mind opening. He was speaking about mind control without using the term. I mean, he understood. We understand the concept, but he wasn't using the terms I was familiar with at all until I started reading and realizing, oh, you're talking about isolation. You're talking about people being punitively damaged by some so-called discipline. That's all from that. Those are elements of cultic mind control and totalitarian authoritarianism within cults. And I could draw the distinctions and say, yeah, Xenos is a cult. The man ain't peddling, some cheap sensationalism. Mark's right. Xenos is a cult, and reading the stuff, reading what's been said. I don't know how many, it's like 150 or was it 200 testimonies he has now. I mean, all the stuff I've just got received in the past few months, it's just astonishing. There's people from all over the planet, all over the nation. A lot of them right in Ohio who may or may not have known each other at all, who are all telling the same story. Telling this, like you, Shauna, like when you were the first one that I think read outside of the Xenos accounts. You're all telling the same story. You're being put upon by authorities that demand you live your life entirely by what they prescribe, without any question, without any sort of recourse. And if you don't, then you're pond scum to God. And no, I when I hear that, I learn a lot quickly that I've heard this song before. I've seen this dance before,
Mhm.
and I can't not say for it, and I can't not call it out for what it is, and that's why we're doing this. Sorry, Justin, go ahead.
Oh, no, you talk about mind control, and I'm just thinking of examples of it, or any of us that have spent any time in that church know that we have our own vocabulary and own programmed responses. I mean, how many times, Shauna, have you heard somebody say, "That wasn't my experience"?
Mm.
I
Right.
mean, that's the first thing. Anytime somebody says something negative about the church to somebody who's, passionately in it and hasn't actually, seen their own abuses yet, the ones
Mhm.
they've committed and the ones they've received, that's always their first thing they say is, "That's not been my experience." And it absolutely has been. They just haven't noticed it yet. But every one of us has probably said that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Like,
Yeah, and that's just the most common one that just comes to my mind. But I mean, I know we kind of have a glossary of Xenos vernacular, just language that we use, edification and um,
oh, and by the way,
yeah,
encourage to not speak that way to others so that they
yes,
wouldn't get confused.
Boom.
yeah,
That's the mic drop right there.
yeah. Okay, I actually
Yeah.
remember being at the beach one time. We actually had a lesson about this, about
Really.
language that we use in the church that you don't use to people outside. And they said, "Here, can you give some examples?" And I said, "Yeah, terms like fellowship. That's not a common. I mean, everybody knows what the definition is, but it's not a common word that we use in everyday language. But we use it all the time in Xenos. And
Edification,
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
building up your brother and sister.
Absolutely, there we go. Yeah,
Right. Right. And you can go right down the list.
Yeah.
When you think about those terms, you don't look at them as face value and just take them for what they mean. Just there's always an inner element of what it really means. There's a sense within any movement that develops its own language, and again, the principles of cultic mind control were first described by Robert J. Lifton, and it's something I keep bringing out again and again and again. And people are going to hate me saying this, but it's the truth. Part of these 8 principles that Robert J. Lifton developed years ago, studying Chinese communism in North Korea. Part of those 8 principles are one called loading the language, and in other words, there's a language. There's a vocabulary. There's a specific verbiage that a group uses amongst itself that outsiders just won't get.
Right. And it gives the idea of a level of elitism, right?
Exactly.
We're special in some kind of stupid way because we have our own, it's very cliquey. It's very Mean Girls. It's very,
right.
Very much like, so you feel inclusive because you know the verbiage and you know how to use it properly.
Mm-hmm. You know the magic. When you tell someone that you're being edifying, there's something being communicated. If a house leader pulls you aside and says, "No, we don't want our brother to stumble. I don't want you stumbling that person." That means something. There's a specific set of instructions and directives, and a certain authority that's being cited that's meant to control, that's meant to compel change. I mean, cultic mind control is about changing behavior by changing thought, and part of that verbiage are the very things you guys are talking about. I personally haven't even scratched the surface to really put together a whole list, but they're there. Those terms come up again and again and again when we talk to people, when we interview them, and when they share about specific things you have to do. And one of those big things is don't stumble your brother, don't stumble your sister. And you all know what that means. There's a specific reaction within you that comes with it when you're suddenly made to think, oh, I might be doing something that causes my brother or sister to stumble. Oh, and so there's specific things you're going to do. There's things you're going to feel. And when somebody when somebody in leadership tells you this, there's a certain way you're going to react to it. Right. So that's just again, that's an excellent point. That was this Dennis out on the beach somewhere with seagulls?
No, I don't remember. I don't remember who it was. It wasn't Dennis. It was
Scott Riley.
Well, I want to say it was probably either James Rochford or Chris Hardy, because it was somebody in my own group that said it to us. But I can't remember precisely who it was.
Okay. All right.
So interesting is and kind of continuing on with that a little bit is like the response that Dennis posted to the several either podcasts or articles or whatever, defaming you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crying victim. Jeez Louise. And
I'm not convinced either, don't worry.
And the interview that you had with Conrad and Kate, and the other college leader that came forward and responded to the NBC or something like that. Anyway, they can write all these responses all they want, but legitimately, we who have talked about the abuse issues, the high level control, all of that, we could write their responses for them because it's a canned response. We already know what they're going to say. To a degree, I mean, there's this. I had to stop reading them because I'm like, this hope is not grounded in anything. This hope that I have that they're going to finally, say, man, this sucks. Paul Alexander had the closest to a response that I found somewhat acceptable. But at the same time, like, I personally know Paul Alexander. I know Paulie. I've known him for 20 years. We were in college group together. I was in one of my first my first group that I was in. We were young professionals, right? We transitioned from the college group. It was Patterson, and Bev and Gary were leading this
Patterson
group along
with
Earl Bear. And they were leading that group. And then the secondary, like the student leadership was Mark Johnson and some of the other folks. And some of those leaders that were in that group are now I've seen in the Facebook group for support, right? So that's interesting to me. But anyway, I'm glad that they have gotten to, found their path, whatnot. But those leaders, right? Like, I have a certain level of respect for them because I've known them for so long, right? But I also know that they are fallible people. And
right.
I know that the influence is a little different in how it's handled when these guys are discipled by Gary versus the response. How they respond is different when they have been discipled by Gary versus how they respond when they've been discipled by Dennis.
Right.
And I spoke about this before. There's legitimately two different camps, right? Because when you're mentored by someone, you learn their style, you learn their voice inflection, you learn that. And Conrad, James, they absolutely mimic Dennis's style.
Right.
His weird wheels. And what's slightly disappointing for me is as far as leadership. Like, I had hope when I knew that the succession plan was having Ryan Lowry begin to move in as senior leader, right? Which is Dennis's son-in-law. But Ryan and Dennis have different thoughts about things. Like, Ryan is not mindless. He has his own viewpoints about things, and he has fought with Dennis about how things played out. So I had some hope there. But what I would really like to hear Ryan himself respond to some of these things. Not the sub crony of Conrad.
Right.
Hear Ryan respond, because I know that his thought patterns have been different than Dennis's, where the other elders are giving canned responses. And I just want to hear Ryan speak to this, really.
Oh, we'd like to hear anyone, any member of, from Dennis, Gary on down, any member of leadership is certainly welcome to come on these, on our discussions. I mean, this is, I would love to be able to have a conversation with them. That was the whole point of us meeting with Kate, and Kate Mizell, I think it's Kate Mizell, Mizell and Conrad Hilario. That was the whole point. We stepped forward out of the shadows, after a whole week of listening and learning about how destructive Xenos is and how much of a parasite it really has become over the lives of people and over the lives of the churches of Columbus. And then the most important, we really want to step forward and ask them, hey, what's your response to these not allegations, but reports of abuse? We believe they've occurred. We talked to 20 something people that week, all telling the same story, the story you guys have. And of course, we don't need to go any further in that. You see what happened. There was the stonewalling of what should be done, and so therefore, and then it ultimately, as things got more and more involved, as more came out, when the NBC broadcasts came out, and the only reason those came out was because the producer of the documentary contacted the media and say, hey, we're doing this interview with these people. Would you like to come chat with them? And that's the only reason why they came out. So they came and met with us at the hotel the day we had a huge support group type meeting that I really hope one of these days will reach the light of day and broadcast.
I'd also hear how some of the other churches that Xenos sends members who are taking the leadership classes to go, for lack of a better term, audit, because you have to compare. The assignment is comparing, how this church interacts with their congregation, how they engage new people, things along that, is their word solid, whatever.
Yeah.
I hear how some of those churches are responding to this. Like I'd like to hear interviews with Vineyard leadership. I'd like to hear interviews with Calvary, Calvary, I don't remember what it's called, on High Street in Clintonville. Rod Parsley's World Harvest is a huge one that they send people to, and I mean that's a cult. But I'd like to hear how some of these other churches in the area are responding, because yes, for the most part, they do have a good working relationship with other churches in the area, but at the same time, there are differences. And
there's
so
agendas too.
Huh?
There are agendas.
Absolutely. Different agendas, right?
You develop relationships for reasons,
Right.
Which sometimes aren't always apparent.
I think about how they've responded about these major players, like I'm forgetting their names off the top of my head. Golly.
You talking about local church leadership there?
Nope, big time. Like D.A. Carson and the people who came and spoke at Xenos Summer Institute.
Right.
I mean, it's L Summer Institute now. Sidebar. But I mean, I met D.A. Carson. Like he's a bit odd, like Dennis is a bit odd. I mean, he's not a very warm person. Not D.A. Carson. That's not the one I'm thinking of. It was a different. Anyway, whatever. These people have came, and I've sat with them on Bev and Gary's back porch, and talked with some of these major key players in modern Christianity.
Right.
That they don't get the day-to-day operations of Xenos. Why would they wouldn't associate with us if these allegations were true. Sure, they wouldn't, but they don't have the experiential knowledge of seeing that play out, because everybody's on their best behavior. Everybody's super excited because these big players are there. Everybody is, they're not doing the regular thing. Tim Keller would not be sitting in on a pastoral counseling session with Bev DeLashman and whatever project she decided to be working on that week. Would not be in on that, and may not hear the abuse, the manipulation.
Never hear that. Yep.
That goes on, because it's not. You don't just sit down and say, well, this and this, and you're going to do this, or this is going to happen. That doesn't happen in regular hour increments.
I remember specifically Vicky Koss when she was on the podcast, how she was relating how years and years ago that in some large mass meeting at Xenos, it goes back maybe in the early 90s or thereabouts, something like that, that they actually had Ralph Winters attending, and Ralph Winters is this like maven. He's this icon of church growth, and he's one of the key leaders of that movement, or drivers of that in the past generation. And he's been gone a few years now, but he's he's right up there. And so Dennis had him there, and Vicky recalls how abusively and how casual and just how coldly he treated his members right in front of him. He was at one point, I think I'd have to go back and listen to the podcast, but at one point she recollects how Ralph Winters' reaction, how his face just changed when he heard how Dennis was talking to somebody there right in front of him. So Dennis doesn't have much of a filter, it seems, at times. And but you're right. That's probably one of the rare times that you're going to see that kind of thing happen. And they manage everything. They curate everything. Every interaction is controlled.
Dennis doesn't have a filter, and he has a very deep vein of cruelty. And I will say that, and this is what I base that on. So I was very close with Bev and Gary for many years. I was considered part of, I did family things with them. I was part of their family gatherings and things. I was, very close with them when Gary's mother passed away. And I mean, it was difficult, and she was a lovely person, and I'm still, very sorry for the family's loss of her. But I will say this, like, I had, some knowledge about, I guess, inner workings. And so when Dennis and Holly and Gary and Bev were first dating, they weren't married yet. And Dennis and Gary were taking Bev and Holly on a double date.
Mm-hmm.
This person, Dennis, conspired and convinced Gary that they would speak German to each other the entire time, so that they were like excluding Bev and Holly from their little soiree. Like they were.
Wow. How did you learn that? Is that a conversation that came out with you and her?
With Bev and I. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I have a picture. I think I may have shared it with you of that first date.
Okay. I'm sure you probably have. It's a lot of bandwidth I've had. Excuse me.
Yeah. So, so when I hear about how Dennis, there was a list of, acceptable people to date, except, for like the guys in the groups and whatnot, and they would go through, I don't know, points about it. Like, that doesn't surprise me at all, because he is a cruel individual deep down. Like, and even in his response, like, he pulled out the quote that you had used, where I was talking about my interaction with Bev and how, there's no friend, other than when God would put me on her heart, would she maybe pray for me? He commented on that, saying, well, I don't know anything about this, something or another, but I'm sure that the other person would, that person would have something different to say about it. You daggone right she would. She would, because she doesn't accept responsibility for her actions either.
Yeah.
She doesn't. Yeah. The puppet master.
Yeah. And that seems to be, the cast. I mean, to your point, Justin and Sean, I mean, there's no accountability. He can pop off. They can say what they want to whenever they want to, with no consequences. They apparently have lived that with that kind of high level authoritarianism, where people just absolutely kowtow to them and go in and out there, and literally they're almost like it's when I hear about that, you get the impression that what you can call the royalty of Xenos are basically cared for. They're like queen ants. You know, queen ants are these giant. Or the queens are like these large, massive life producing animals within their colony of ants that keep putting out the people that provide the reason for the colony's existence, and everybody cares for them. There's nothing they can do that they're not. They're fed. Their excretions are carried away. I mean, it's all there, and that's exactly what what goes on within any authoritarian movement. People can do, leaders can do, and live as they please.
That's funny you say that, because Bev refers to herself as the Queen of Xenos.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. Yeah, and I seem to remember a scripture or two here that I would like to quote. But at this moment, I want to play a clip here for and it was something that we've received, and I wanted to kind of share with you. It was a clip that was taken from, let's see, I think the name of the talk was Understanding the Battle. And that was, again, a message preached by Conrad that I think really speaks to their response, what they've been doing in response to the pressure they've been feeling. But it also says a lot about this attitude of elitism. I'm gonna play it for you. So
do you find time to limit your input, to get away, to reflect, to evaluate, to weigh the things that you are hearing? Or is there a compulsion just to put in the next podcast, or to check our phone to see what the next news story is, or to just basically numb ourselves by jumping onto social media and wasting time? Secondly, feed your mind with content that will challenge your thinking. The most obvious thing that we should be soaking our minds in is Scripture. Scripture does, for me anyway, it does not simply affirm the things that I think. It challenges my thinking. It calls me into account. God raises a standard so high that I realize I fall short of that. That is the best way to make sure you are not part of an echo chamber, and to have a reliable external source of reference for your thinking.
Okay. Well, that's great for Conrad to say that. It's another quiet thing to see how he's lived with it, because in talking about an echo chamber, that's essentially what Xenos is. Because it's actually what I've liked to call this. It's a womb. Everything within it is just so managed and so controlled, and that anything that tries to get in is repelled. Anything that tries to get in that could potentially damage a growing embryo or whatever's growing inside is repelled and defined and cut off. That's what you've been talking about. We've been hearing about how people are brought in and then are won to the Lord, and then brought to this home fellowship and get involved in the whole Xenos scheme of things. And then at the same time, however, they learn pretty quickly that there's certain limits you don't go beyond. There's certain questions you don't ask. There's certain things you don't do. And there's new behaviors you need to adopt, and that's what this has been about. We've seen how this is indicative. Now, this is not indicative of a New Testament church, but this is more of a personality cult where people are in charge of lives, such as you guys have experienced, and you've been and to Conrad's point here, I'll read something for you, Conrad, because I know you'll be watching this. There's a scripture that I in 1 Peter 5, it says, "Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. all of you be submissive to one another and clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That challenges me daily, Conrad. That challenges me every day when I'm called an expert or a minister, because it lets me know I need to be accountable to other people. I'm be embracing this calling I have as a pastor, as a minister, as a countercult apologist, as an activist, very humbly. And that's not something that I'm seeing in Xenos by all the response we've been hearing. So that's a scripture for you. And I've got a lot more. I'm a preacher. I can go at it, but I'm not going to do that now. But that says a lot to me. That says a lot to me about where Xenos really is. When you don't see that humility, you don't see that submission one to another. That's why the castes that you see develop. That's why you can see Dennis and Gary at the top of the food chain. And I use that term very deliberately. You can see them at the top of a food chain, a pecking order. It's a natural example of showing just really what's going on, because this isn't a spiritual. They can couch it in spiritual terms, but this is not a New Testament church whatsoever. It's something entirely different. So,
I will say that to back up that point, is the one thing that I've always noticed was absent in Xenos is, they would always talk about God and very occasionally Jesus, but I've never heard anybody talk about the Holy Spirit. Nobody ever talks about being spirit led, and everything that they do is really taking authority away from the Holy Spirit, such as convicting people of their sins. That's not something that's on the authority of man to do to other men. And it's just
they've become the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I was trying to get to. It's not something that they teach. It's they take all that authority so that they can use it, and that's not a New Testament church thing.
Right.
And again, I would say that is, and Justin, well, before I say what I was going to say, Justin, were you in the college group or were you in the adult sphere?
Okay. I started to interrupt you a little bit. I apologize for that. When you said that you were in Patterson, I was in Patterson. We've never met, and yet we have a connection there.
I was in Patterson in 2002, 2003.
And I joined in 2004, 2005. Okay.
We had split after that, and it became Longview.
Okay, I was in my group retained Patterson. We were Patterson 4, and then we were dissolved for being, as they put in the annual report, one of the churches that had poor planting. And we were the one that I think I've told Raphael before that Dennis himself referred to us as Corinth.
Lovely.
And that's another bit of Xenosian programming. What does that mean? If you're Corinth, if you've been called Corinth by Dennis, what shorthand does that really mean?
I don't know, because I think Dennis is kind of Corinthian himself, isn't he?
You're the drunken whores of the group. Oh God, what is the word I'm looking for? I haven't had enough coffee, Raphael.
Drink some more.
It's too early.
Yeah, I know. You're undisciplined.
Undisciplined, yes.
Yeah.
Undisciplined. You're flying by
reprobates.
You're, having orgies. You're having drunken parties. You're unmanageable.
Wow.
So you're just.
So you were the Corinthians, and they had to break you up.
Yeah. But yeah, what I found interesting there was that, like I said, Shauna and I have never met. This is the first time we've ever spoken, right. And we were 1 year apart in the group, and I know that Raphael, you and I, discussed before about just like being shuffled around the church all the time, just arbitrarily, and I think that's an example of it right there.
Right. It is. It is because as much as his books and his writings center around his thesis of discipleship being called organic, as much as he wants to believe that that the discipleship of Xenos is something that's actually connected with real life situation, it's not. This is this is as sterile as it gets. You couldn't grow, you couldn't maintain any kind of growth Xenos has without a lot of lab work, because they are very, very deliberate in how they control people's lives, to the point that you can be told, okay, you're meeting, like you said, Justin, you're meeting in Corinth 1 week. We're going to have you go to Ephesus next week. Okay. We're going to have you go to this place next, and all 20 of you are going to go there.
As long as we're following Paul's, ministry. Okay, cool. Let's go.
Yeah. Right.
I forget what I was going to say. It was more of like when Dennis's brother Buck unexpectedly died on a missions trip in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
That was early on, maybe late 90s, 2000. And Dennis took over handling the college ministry. Like the folks that come out of the college ministry, again, it's, a Dennis and Gary camp. Like it's different because of the influence. And I don't know. It's just it's kind of sad.
Right. Well, when you have people living with each other and patterning themselves after themselves, ultimately you're going to find people gravitating towards one way or the other. Somebody's going to be looking for a leader to model themselves after. That's the whole point, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're supposed to be modeling yourself after some godly leader who's going to be telling you, the ABCs of the Christian way, and ultimately it comes down to where people begin to model even their own mannerisms, even their own desires, their hairstyles. I mean, that was just something that came across over and over when you watch cult songs. People are going to talk like a cult leader. They're going to act like them. They're going to do like them.
Funny
to the point where they cut their hair, they wear the clothes, they speak, they do what they like. If cult leader A likes to ride unicycles, guess what? The bicycle street down the bicycle shop down the street from the cult is gonna have a run on unicycles, right? That's how it is.
Yeah.
Am I right? Or am I wrong? I mean, that's the way it is.
Right. Listening to that clip of Conrad talking was like nails on a chalkboard for me, because it was like listening to Dennis.
Yeah. I was about to say, it doesn't matter which clip you play. You could pick, however many leaders they have, 20, 30 of them that they have on their podcast teachings there. Every one of them has the same voice inflections.
Yeah.
Every single one of them.
Right.
Difference would be is if you listen to Mike Sullivan's teachings, he sounds more like Gary. Or if John Cleary is teaching, that's where you I mean, if you want to do a case study, Raphael, just figure out who's who, and you'll be able to figure it out like immediately, who sounds like who, and where their influence has come from. And maybe I'm a bit wrong with this, but my viewpoint, the way that I see it is, Dennis has been the spearhead of this whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain degree, I feel like Gary has followed along. Now he's a clear thinking, makes his own decisions and all that. He's a free thinking individual, and he's very smart. And he has disagreed with Dennis on things, but they both have two different ways of doing things.
Right. They do.
And so part of it is kind of cringy to me when I hear, like Gary's getting drugged through it with Dennis, but it's kind of, you're judged by the company you keep, right?
Yeah. Yep. You are.
So has Gary done things that are wrong? Sure. He's a faithful human. I feel like he's more willing to admit his human nature of maybe sinning against others. I don't know. It's just it, and maybe I still just have after all these years, still just have the Gary fangirl thing, and maybe that's just so deeply embedded. I don't know. I mean, to be completely honest, because kind of like you can take the farm girl off the farm, but she's still a farm girl no matter what. Right. So you can take the Xenoid out of Xenos, but there's still, I mean, I'm sure you can agree with this, Justin, there's still ways that you respond because of the programming in different areas, like different interpersonal things that happen in your regular day-to-day life, and there's
the way you relate.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a grain of like responding to that. Like, for example, like when I read Dennis's response, I immediately wanted to email him and counter argue everything, and I'm like, girl, you don't live in Ohio anymore. You have left this church years ago. Like, is it really that important? And is he going to read it? And it ain't going to do no good. So why are you wasting your time on this?
Yeah, you're right. I immediately wanted to counter argue all of it. And the same thing with James's responses. I mean, I was quoted twice in the Daily Beast article, and I know he skipped right over it. And then my birthday was like 2 days after that article came out, and I get a happy birthday message on Facebook from James. And it's like, really? And I know all it was him just saying, "Hey, I'm watching you." And but yeah, I have to restrain myself. It's like I don't want to argue with these people. I honestly, I don't really ever want to see any of these people again. But yeah, you're right. I have responses. I get infuriated when I see this stuff.
Right, and again, that's certainly understandable. You were in an environment where you were exposed to good cop, bad cop dynamics of leadership there. There was you knew Dennis was the wise bearded man, but he had the whip, whereas Gary was also another wise bearded man, but he had the feather. He had a light touch. Dennis had the heavy touch. So when you're being modeled, when you're being conditioned to follow their lead one way or the other, you're going to learn real quickly. As human beings do. You're going to learn real quickly. Okay, there's certain things that I need to watch my P's and Q's about around Dennis as opposed to Gary. Dennis is going to be really, really strict and really, really hardcore. Gary's not. Gary's maybe a bit more of a soft touch. I think that comes with it with any kind of human authority we purposefully choose to live around. I mean, it's again, it's very understandable because we, for the first several years of our lives, we're brought up by parents, right? I mean, the parents are our world. I mean, they become everything to us. We derive all meaning from them, and our play, our coming and going, our doing what we do, it's just our own ways of experimenting with what's the reality, with what's going on. But ultimately, we run back to mom and dad for the answers, right? Well, in any movement with centralized authority to the point that it's totalitarian and authoritarian, like Dennis and like Gary, everybody's going to run back to them and see what they have to say, and do as they want you to do, and that's exactly where where the movement starts to become very, very questionable. Yes, it's true they're human beings. Yes, it's true they have failings. Yes, it's true they have foibles, for lack of a better word, and they have shortcomings. But at the same time, how do you define that though? At what point does anyone become accountable for what they do? And
Well,
who dares call it for what it is?
well, going back to First Peter,
Mm-hmm.
um,
I'm glad you said that.
I'm sorry.
I'm glad you said that.
My favorite verse is First Peter 3:15.
Mm-hmm.
But in this instance, I like it going even a little farther.
Yeah.
So I have my Bible, and it's NASB, the correct version. Not okay. Anyway,
The entire version, Shauna.
no other version but NASB. Okay, so Peter says, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And
Right.
keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong."
Exactly. Right.
And he goes on to talk about, Christ dying for our sins and the just for the unjust and whatnot. But we're bringing this forward, right? We're saying these things, right? We're slandering, and there's no defense. They're not giving a defense. They're not being gentle. They're not being reverent in how they are responding. It's just counterclaims, saying that we're just angry people. I haven't been angry for a long time. Like, I have not.
Mm-hmm.
But what is an issue that is still disappointing, not angering, but disappointing, is that they won't acknowledge and they won't even consider the possibility that there's a grain of truth to it. And
well, Dennis does say there are kernels of truth to what Raphael is saying. I haven't even responded to his thing yet, but then he immediately buries all that. But no, you're absolutely right. He may say that one thing in passing, but there's absolutely no acknowledgement that, like you said, Shauna, that maybe there might be something to what you guys are saying.
right. I mean, that's to say, the work that they've done with human trafficking victims. Okay. If that's to say, the way that they're responding to these allegations would be like just being to these human trafficking victims saying, yeah, but that didn't really happen. Or, yeah, you might have incurred one thing, but all these other things is, malarkey.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you discount that? How do you say that's not my experience when we are giving you experiential evidence?
Mm-hmm.
We are to accounts, personal firsthand accounts, which that's what this is. Accounts of house church movements. Like, we're giving you a personal account, but you're saying that it's Satan attacking you. I'm not saying just Satan. Raphael's not. You're not Satan. I don't. It's just so.
It's nice to hear.
Yeah. And, that's the most common response that any Xenoid has is that that's not my experience. Well, it absolutely is your experience, because we all have the same experience. It's
Mhm.
just you're still, in the dark with a cloth over your eyes. Well, the rest of us have had that taken off. We've looked around and like, this isn't right.
Mhm.
It's made it,
Right.
all right. So a current Xenos member says it's not my experience. Okay, great. It's not your experience. It's not your current experience. It's not how you view. It's not the lens that you're looking through to see that this is currently what's going on. You have these blinders on, right?
Mhm.
And um they have to teach, they do teach critical thinking. Like I was thinking back in, Christian leadership classes where they have you look at different marketing things. Like for
Mhm.
I remember specifically one was an advertisement for Prudential for insurance,
Okay.
and to critically think about what that media is telling you, right? What they're trying to invoke from you by their marketing strategies. And yes, you should be critically thinking about what input you're being fed. What if you're, I mean, if someone is just looking at porn all day, or they derive their
Yeah.
understanding of current events from Facebook, or that whatever your intake of knowledge is for that day, like that is going to influence your outlook and your thought process, right? So sorry, those are very two drastic different things, but
Right.
but the point is that what you're intaking gives you this perception, this lens of how you're looking at things. And yes, you should be critically viewing things. But what is your criteria that you're using to critically view these things?
Mhm.
Are you using the Xenos checklist of criteria that they're attacking us? They're saying this,
Mhm.
trying to make us look bad. They're saying
Yeah.
they're doing this. This is what they said. Well, I mean, and maybe I'm going to be vilified for this, but this is my perception of things. I've listened to some of the podcasts, following and read some of the articles and things like that. And some people are more angry than others. And that's okay. Everybody
Mhm.
a different level of how much they've processed things and whatnot. And do I think that some things are said out of anger? Sure. But again, we're all human. That doesn't mean that I don't think that their experiences are their experiences. But our level of emotion does cloud our judgment on things.
Right.
But does that say that I'm defending Xenos's behavior on the individual circumstances of how things were dealt with? Absolutely not.
Right.
Because it boils down to what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. I have a very intense sense of justice. And again, like referring back, like I have to just lay some of these things down because
And you do.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't
We all do.
have a horse in this race anymore.
Right.
And I
Oh,
know that on Judgment Day, God will either remove jewels from the crown and throw them in the lake of fire, or give them. And it's
Right.
God will attest to what's going on here.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, being able to speak out and speak about some of these things may help someone in the future. And I had a roommate after I left the church, and she knew my experience, and her brother had came back, had got out of the military, and he was started going to college at OSU. Well, you can imagine where my story is going to go from here. He got wrangled into Xenos, and
Good morning, Grandpa.
oh, good morning, Grandpa.
This is my granddaughter. He's got.
Hello.
good morning.
Yeah, she was the one that kept me up happy night.
Oh.
I gotta talk to these people a while. Can you go outside for a little bit? Okay, thank you, baby. Thank you. She just thank you. Close the door. Thank you, baby. Sorry. I'm
Um,
sorry.
he got
I thought I had locked the door and I did.
he got wrangled into Xenos, and she was very concerned because she knew what my experience was. And I'm
Yeah.
like, look, there's not a thing that you're going to be able to say to him that's going to pull him out of it. He's going to have to learn on his own.
Yeah.
Like he'll
Yeah.
figure it out. Unfortunately, it's just something that you got to ride out.
Yeah. There's a point at which, if you're watching this through the Xenosverse show or whatever, I don't even know what we call it yet, but if you have a stake in this and you really believe that Xenos is God's last day movement, the hope of the world, it hasn't gone very far from Ohio Valley, has it? I mean, it's just been in Columbus. But think about the nature, and this is the problem that I think we've been discussing here. Think
Well, no,
about the.
not true,
Go
Robin.
ahead.
That's not true. There's a faction in Ireland.
Well, right, yeah, right. There's groups everywhere, right? There's one in Ireland. There's one. I know there's church planting. I think it's Cincinnati, and someone mentioned at Kent State, but they're
Cambodia.
all around those sort of areas.
There's a lot.
But definitely Dwell/Xenos is the central. It's
Yes.
the place. It's where the central teaching comes from. So think about this in terms of the nature of the fellowship, of what goes on there. Everything we've talked about for the last hour, almost hour and a half now, is the fact that what Xenos does is entirely within itself. Everybody is patting themselves after what they see within their movement, and they put out enough feelers to the outside world to make it sound as if they're in connection with great scholars like you said, like D.A. Carson, and people like that. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that within Xenos, there's only one person running a show. Okay, and he may be retired. His influence may be quote unquote muted, but there's only one influence there that matters, and that's typically how it works. And within that arrangement, he's made everybody basically come into an agreement. Whereas as you live in the covenant with one another, you're going to be patting yourselves after your leaders. You're going to go after what the leaders say. You're going after what the leaders do. You're going to follow what they follow. You're going to eat what they eat. You're going to go where they want you to go. You're going to spend your money on what they tell you to spend your money on. I mean, and that's and they're doing all that to maintain this unified conformity. Conformity isn't unity. Okay, it's not the same thing. It's just compliance to an external standard. It's and in Xenos, that's what goes on. And I'm going to read again. I'm going to read this, and we'll probably need to wrap it up here a little bit, unless you guys just want to keep going. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 12, verse 12, we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves. This is Paul writing to the Corinthians about some of the really questionable leadership. Sorry?
You just in Corinthian.
Oh yeah, I'm a Corinthian.
Yeah, you're well. This is what you Corinthians spat out with hard fought truth. He said, "We dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves." That's pretty heavy. Think about that. We should not class ourselves or compare ourselves or be like those who are always commending themselves, those who puff themselves up. And then it goes on to say this is what's really kicker here. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. I remember what Vicky said about Dennis being a scoffer. And that comes to mind, really, because that's what Xenos is. It's not a movement seeking to emulate Christ. It's a bunch of people told to comply to the rules of Dennis and other leaders under them. And you're comparing yourself, and they are comparing themselves to themselves and saying, "Oh, we're the greatest thing since the New Testament church," and they're not. Well, it's very obvious by the things we've been talking about that they're not. And that's been my concern as a minister, as an activist, that this silence that I see in the religious world, and it can't go on. These conversations need to continue. I'd love to have you guys back next week or whenever we do it, but that's really important to keep in mind that we are dealing with a group that's not at the heart of Christian mission. It's a heart of replication. It's creating clones of itself, but what's the quality? What's really behind the pretty picture here? Any closing thoughts on that matter? I mean, it's anything else you'd like to say? Unless you just want to keep going another half hour, but it's up to you.
Go ahead, Justin.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think I'm getting ready to wrap up, but go ahead, Shauna.
I was just thinking, I have two friends that are still involved in Xenos, and they were involved in leadership, house church leadership. And they're going against the grain, still communicating with me. Now, we don't communicate like we used to, because we were, involved all the time, 7 days a week. Right. But my dear friend, she and her husband have really been prayerfully considering, all this is going on, and it overwhelms her.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it too much. We might have, a few words here and there, but she had to stop reading so much. She had to stop,
Right.
even from internal church communications, they had to, step back from it because it's very overwhelming to her. And I can completely understand, they have a young family in the church, being in church leadership, and where the dynamic has given her so much.
Yeah.
It's disheartening to her to see how other things have played out, right? I remember listening to Carrie's podcast, Carrie Puchovich, and I knew Carrie. I didn't know, I wasn't close with her, but I was surprised to hear all that was going on, because the outward perception didn't reflect that to me.
Mhm.
Let's just say that I had very limited interactions with her. She probably wouldn't even remember me, but I have a knack for remembering people. So, I mean, I picked up on who the roommates she was talking about were, and the things that had gone on. And that's another thing, like with how they respond to things. They have this big overview, right? They don't know the intricacies of things that are happening, right? They don't know the daily personal interactions that, it's the little things that add up to the big things. And again, just back to that accountability, like, hey, this is possible that it happened because so many people are saying
Right.
similar things. Like, golly.
Yeah.
What are there legal implications to say that? Yeah, I don't get it. I don't understand why. But clearly there is a public relations movement to the aspect where you go out and you
Sure.
purchase, Dwell as a cult websites to try to preempt those things.
Right.
You know that this is your perception. You know that this is how you're perceived within the community, and now it's on a much wider scale.
Right. And it's just starting, I believe. I think it's been different groups going everywhere. I mean, Mark's been around. There's been a couple video podcasts. There are people doing things here and there, but I think the volume and the content are certainly escalating highly, and they don't know what to do. This is unlike anything they've ever faced before in their history. They've had fallouts and church controversies and examinations, but this is certainly getting a lot more pronounced. And Justin, to your, have you have the last word here on this at this point?
Yeah, Shauna brought up that they like to say that we're a bunch of angry people, and that we're not. We're not, especially those of us who were recruited or converted. We're not like, yeah, we're upset. We're not angry. The most vicious, angry people that come out of that church are the Xenos babies, the people who were born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, Shauna's nodding her head and her eyes got wide. She knows what I'm talking about. Those are the real contenders, in the ring. And I want to say, just for a warning of leadership, if you want to know where your enemies are, look at your own children. What are you doing to them? What are you taking away from them that they are going to resent you
Right.
for the rest of their lives?
Right. Yeah, there's a legacy there. At the end of the day, after you shut all the lights off, you turn the streaming off, and you put the Bible down, and you've kicked out the last member you're going to kick out of your group for not doing what you want them to do. When you close the doors, what kind of legacy are you going to be living with? What are you going to say to the grandchildren? Like I look at my granddaughter walking in, and said, I look at her and I said, what kind of a legacy am I leaving her, knowing that Grandpa has to sit in a room and not talk to her when she wants to talk to me? I get very sensitive to that, but she understands. She's cool with that. But I don't have the legacy, however, that these people at home have. Think about the Xeno, like I said, all the second, third, fourth generations. What have they come away with knowing about God? What have they come with knowing about grace? What do they know about life? What life lessons have you taught them without trying to? I mean, that's what we call in Christian education the hidden curricula. You can say you have A, B, and C to teach me, but if in doing that, I'm really learning E, F, and G, what's being lost there? And that is where like you said, Justin, where the real tragedy is. The very thing that they want to enshrine for us all to see, in terms of greater, more spiritual, more successful, more connected Christian people, are anything but. And that's the real tragedy of it all. What legacy do you live? My granddaughter can walk in and out of my room if she really needs to, and I'll have that. But can a Xenos baby do that with Dennis or their own parents? Can they do that and talk freely about things and not always feel eggshells underfoot? Good question, Justin.
Yeah.
Was
it Solomon who said, don't spend your life building an empire because it's just your children who's going to destroy it?
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about Christianity shooting its wounded, that's not even a question in Xenos. They don't even admit they're wounded. They let them bleed out for you, and they use that as a teachable moment. That this is the way you really treat people. No, that's not what my Bible tells me. The Bible tells me you're supposed to love one another as God has loved us, and that's not what we're seeing, and that's what we're saying here. And it needs to be exposed. It needs to continue to be talked on. Folks, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate the time you spent. And we'll have you back next time, and whenever you can. And we'll keep talking about things through the Xenosverse.
Great. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you, Shauna.
Nice meeting you as well.